Welcome back as we circle back to our top story, and that is Singapore reclaiming its position as the world's most competitive economy amongst 70 others. Now, here to share more on the results is Professor Arturo Bris, Professor of Finance and Director of the IMD World Competitive Centre. Welcome, sir. First of all, how does Singapore's performance compare to our regional counterparts? I guess, what are some of the things we're doing right and perhaps not so right?
Obviously, Singapore tops the ranking this year, and it means that it has been doing much better than anybody else. It's also true that the overall region, probably with the exception of Indonesia, has been climbing in the rankings. And this shows that Southeast Asia, in comparison to, for example, Western Europe or Latin America, has been much more resilient to the recent crises that we have been living since 2024, 2025. And what Singapore is doing extremely well is a stable institutional environment with a very clear vision and very clear strategy to move away from services and moving much more into manufacturing and a much more diversified economy.
So even the strongest economies, however, are vulnerable to volatile global economy. What is the tangible value this positioning actually brings, given Singapore's operating in such an environment?
Yes, the world now is very different where it used to be 20 years ago from the competitiveness perspective. Competitiveness is prosperity. And 20 years ago, the key to prosperity for a country was much more about globalization, international trade, opening to the rest of the world. Because of the China-US war, I think we're living in a world in which protectionism and protection of national interest is much more important. I think in that context, both geographical position and also small size then helps. And that's where Singapore stands out. Singapore does extremely well in all of our dimensions of competitiveness, including, for example, how resilient it has been to crisis.
How real do you think are the cost pressures and other issues like attracting and retaining talent threats to Singapore's competitiveness?
This is a very important aspect of that. First of all, cost is usually the price to pay for competitiveness. What I'm trying to say is that if you look at the top 5 economies in our ranking, that include Singapore, but also Hong Kong, Switzerland, Taiwan, and the UAE, these are all expensive economies in the sense that real estate prices, price indices are very high. And that's because, these countries have strong currencies, then prices are high, real estate, office rental becomes expensive. That's the price to pay. I have to say that there are other countries that are not as competitive that they suffer the same problem, for example, the UK. And that is where you see the real difficulty to generate prosperity. So cost is a price to pay. But as we said this year, competitiveness this year is not anymore about cost discipline. It's much more about the institutional environment. Okay?
Yeah, sorry.
To add to your second point, I think
carry on.
In the current fragmented world, you see in the current fragmented world, you see that being able to have a clear direction and being able to navigate uncertainty through resilience is again very important. And institutions play a fundamental role.
Yeah. You mentioned countries. Let's talk regions. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, all in the top 10. What does this say about the Asian story? What is it telling us about Asia's competitive advantage?
Yes, it is clearly in the right direction. And I would also include some other countries in the region, including mainland China. That is, China has been increasing as well in our competitive ranking. I think the future is Asian. There's no doubt about that. Add to this that European economies have been much more exposed to geopolitical conflicts and to the energy crisis. Add to this that despite a slight increase in its ranking, the United States is still a very fragmented economy internally and with lots of issues when it comes to government efficiency. And finally, add to that in the rest of the regions, particularly Latin America and Africa, government efficiency and institutions are not still strong. And in that context, then you can see how naturally Southeast Asia emerges as a winner. And as you say, Singapore, I think, is a good representation, but other other Southeast Asian economies also are in the top 10 and top 20.
Yeah. You know, last question. The competitive ranking is ultimately just a snapshot in time. When you look ahead, what would the next stages of competitiveness, challenges, issue be for Singapore and the region that they need to be addressing now?
Yes, that's a very important, right? Because as you say, competitiveness is just a picture of the current situation of a country. If you look at, for example, what has happened with Switzerland, the country where I live, it has dropped 2 positions in the ranking from 1 to 3. And that's a warning signal, because I think what happened with Switzerland is that we have not shown enough agility to adapt to the current challenges, being them geopolitical or technological. And I think that should be a key learning for Singapore. I think Singapore is an extremely agile economy. You respond very well in many different dimensions. Educational reform, industrial policy, regulation, and it is not something that you can lose. It comes with your system and it comes with your vision. So to the extent that you remain quick at adapting and agile, you will be able to navigate the challenges of the future. I see that in the next 20 years, the ranking is going to dramatically change. We will see upcoming powers in the top 10, including China, but also Saudi Arabia, or perhaps India. I strongly believe that the UAE and Singapore will definitely remain there.
All right. I do want to thank you for your thoughts and insights into those rankings. Professor Arturo Bris from the IMD World Competitiveness Center. Thank you.